morning, I'm Charley Lewis. I'm an academic at the Link Centre at Wits University, at least that's what I am now. If I asked to summarise my sort of history that takes me to where I am now, I mean, I'm a former high school teacher, a former computer programmer, a former political activist, a former trade unionist, and latterly an academic. If you want to reflect on my sort of history and my engagement with the internet, I guess it really began when I joined COSATU. Right about that time, I saw an advert, I think it was in the Mail and Guardian actually, for a project at COSATU called the Metric Project. And I put in a CV sort of half-heartedly, and then I got a call saying, we want to interview you for the job. And I went for the interview and I got offered the job, and I turned it down initially because it meant a cut in salary, and I really wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do. And then I got a call from Jay Naidu and Sam Shilowa, as he was then, before he adopted Mbazima as his name, and persuaded, had my arm twisted, and so I agreed to take on the job at COSATU running the Metric Project. It was a very, very fraught and very difficult time for me. The person that had run the advertisement was a woman by the name of Sarah Cliff, who was leaving the organization and leaving the project, and I guess because she saw the writing on the wall. And so I kind of very innocently, unknowingly blundered into the middle of a project that was in crisis. And so my first couple of years at COSATU, from about 94, 95, 96, were really spent trying to save this project, which was, you know, they had done the worst thing you possibly can do in IT projects. They had done a joint application design session, and the users had said, we want this, we want this, we want this, and they said, yes, please, we'll give you everything. And they created an enormous system using Oracle, which was very expensive at the time, required expensive computers to run, required extensive training in order to try and deliver everything. And basically none of it worked. And so I spent the first couple of years there trying desperately to bail the Oracle system out. At that period of time, there was work that was going on in COSATU in relation to the internet, in relation to email, in relation to websites, mailing lists, etc. But it was really in the early years fairly kind of low on my agenda. My kind of focus was very much on trying to save the Metric Project. The Italian Trade Union Federation, CGIL, as it was then, which was the socialist, the left-wing Labour Federation, set up a big project with COSATU, and that was called the Metric Project. It was one of those, I can't remember what the acronym stands for now, but it was an acronym, and essentially they came in and they did a whole range of things within COSATU. And the Oracle-based computerized membership system became quite a central plank in that project, although initially it hadn't been intended as such. The project had a number of planks: capacity building, use of computers and email, and the membership system. And I think the membership system came to the fore largely because there's always, in a trade union federation like that, there's always a tension. You have the leadership who would like to get accurate figures of the unions because the unions pay dues to the federation based on their membership, which means that the unions have an incentive to downplay the numbers of members they have, so they pay a smaller amount of dues to the federation, except at Congress time, because your voting blocks of the Congress are based on your membership. And so at that point they try and up their membership figures. So the Federation was very keen to get accurate membership figures, and they saw a computerized system as a way of doing that. And that led to tensions with the unions. It created a whole series of organizational problems. So the aspects of the project that focused on email and the internet were relatively under the radar, underplayed at the time. I wish I knew more about it, there would have been an underground history, because obviously under the state of emergency, with the apartheid government, there would have been a very strong need for communications between the structures outside of the country, the ANC-led alliance in particular, and COSATU. And some of that did take place by means of email. People like Simon Schall in the early days when they were using FidoNet as the technology talks about receiving messages from Lusaka, receiving messages from London, and copying and pasting them into messages which were then distributed within the labor movement. So there was a history of electronic communications involving the labor movement. The early stuff was fairly basic, fairly rudimentary, and demanded a fairly high degree of technical know-how. And so people like Mike Jensen wrote scripts and programs to make things happen, to make the email work. And at that time it had moved off FidoNet onto what is more the sort of standard email system that people use today. And what that meant was, if anything went wrong, the people on the ground couldn't fix it. And so they had, prior to the 94 elections, they did set up, through the Metric project, before I arrived, they did set up an email communication system which involved connecting every single one of COSATU's regional office. So COSATU obviously is a head office in Johannesburg, and the unions are affiliated to that, but COSATU had regional offices in each of the 9 provinces of the country, and they typically consisted of an administrator and an organizer as full-time employees, and then elected officials who would be typically workers holding the kind of political reins within the regional offices. And because they are factory workers, truck drivers, fairly blue-collar type of people, and COSATU historically was very much a blue-collar federation, they lacked skills and they were very distrustful of the new technology. The administrators who got given, here's a computer, here's a modem, here's an email system, use it, suddenly found themselves burdened with an extra level of functionality for which they were not going to be paid extra, which was difficult to understand, difficult to manage and to operate, and were therefore kind of suspicious of the system. Subsequently, not very much happened. The computers lay in the regional offices. They were not really used. They were supposed to be integrated and liaised with the membership system, but that really didn't happen very effectively. COSATU at the time, in a slightly different area, had already established a website. And the website was in fact set up by Tim Jenkin of Operation Vula fame. And there's another very interesting story to be told there around Operation Vula, around the use of modems, the use of telephones, the use of call boxes. So Operation Vula's communications, because they couldn't use fixed phones because calls could be traced and monitored, and obviously communications were encrypted, what they would do is they would load the communications on a tape recorder and go to a telephone booth, and using the telephone booth connect to somebody's modem, and they would pump, the sort of high-pitched kind of squeal of kind of bits and bytes that you hear in the old-fashioned modems across the phone line would be recorded at the other end and then taken off somewhere else and decrypted and decoded and made use of. I think Tim Jenkin from Operation Vula fame coming back into the country was responsible quite extensively for creating an online presence for the ANC, for the South African Communist Party, and for COSATU through websites in particular, and also quite heavily involved in creating a presence for political structures, parliament, etc., You know, and you think in those early years in the 1990s, mid-1990s, South Africa was very much at the forefront of kind of government, political structures, presence on the web, making information available, communicating information. And he had set up the COSATU website, and it was round about the time when the Metric project was really, the membership system was running into difficulties, that I kind of fell on the website as something useful to do for the IT function in COSATU. And so, using a bit of my kind of computer background, I took over the COSATU website, and at that time it was very much a flat HTML website, and I took over the creation of the various pages on the website using initially WordPad, I think it was. So actually doing the website in raw HTML. So you were reading every single tag, you know, the bold slash bolds, paragraph slash paragraph, everything in kind of text format, and uploading those files. And then subsequently I learnt a program which was a little bit more sort of WYSIWYG, so you could actually switch to another view and you could actually see what your HTML was going to look like, but it was still doing the coding in actually raw HTML on the website. And we established a mailing list for press statements. So I took over that function. Previously, when COSATU had done its press statements, they had an enormous fax machine on the 10th floor, and they would draft a press statement. It would be okayed, signed off by Mbazima Shalowa, and they would then go and load it on the fax machine, and they would do bulk fax dialing of everybody. So it was faxed out to all the regional offices, faxed out to all the news organizations, etc., etc. And we took that function over and replaced it with an email mailing list. So the press statements now were emailed out, and we tried to show that there was an enormous cost saving to the organization, and then were distributed by email to all of those kind of structures. There were a lot of problems with that. I mean, the news organizations loved it because they got copy in a format that they could actually manipulate and edit and create news stories out of it. The regional offices hated it because their ability to use email was nascent at best, and they were always complaining they didn't get press releases now that the whole thing had moved over to a mailing list. So we set up that mailing list, and I think it still runs today. And we also set up on the website a facility that allowed people to say, I'd like to join your mailing list, please. And I think initially that was manual. So the mailing list itself was in a web-based interface that we set up from Sanganet, who are our service provider. And essentially what you did was you harvested a bunch of requests, and you would go and bulk load them onto the system that ran the email. We were also working together with Sanganet, created a facility on the COSATU website, and I think it's gone now. I don't think it works that way anymore, whereby every single press release, there was an email address that landed up in a computer-based script. So what would happen is the press statement would flood into the script would then turn the press release into an HTML page, pop it up on the website, and update the index with the latest press release at the top of the website. And so there was a continual archive of all of the press statements. It also had a facility where it would go to the home page, and it would put the latest press release at the top of the list, which had 5 press releases, and knock the bottom one off, so there were always 5. So we automated that to keep the press statements going on the website, and to make the website as interactive as possible, and as continually updated as possible. In terms of email and the popularization of email, we very early recognized that in order to get email as a technology of use, we had to find ways of making sure that union people couldn't operate without using the email and the internet. At the time, we had got a leased line from the 8th floor, which is where the IT offices were, through to the Sanganet office, a Telkom leased line. We had put next to the leased line a server which would once an hour dial up. I mean, this is old stuff. Once an hour over the, well, it was initially dial-up and then it would move to a leased line, but once an hour it would batch and chuck out all of the emails, pull in the next bunch of emails and distribute them over the network that we had at COSATU. Previously, initially, when people phoned into COSATU, there was an exchange, there was a telephonist who would take messages, and these were all written on little pieces of paper. So-and-so phoned you, please return the call at this number, and they were put in people's pigeonholes. And we got Mbazima to throw that system out and connect the telephonist with a computer, and so she would simply create email messages for everybody. The trick was then getting people to read the email message. I guess it gave them another excuse for not returning calls. We also got him to stop faxing out minutes of meetings to all of the regional offices and to distribute those by means of email to the regional offices, who then complained bitterly that they weren't getting them because they'd always, always the computer that got blamed, and poor old Sanganet got blamed a lot for things that went wrong, but they were often computer problems, skills problems. So there were a lot of problems getting the email system used, getting it to grow to a scale at which it was a useful resource for the labour movement. COSATU's always been very extensively involved in policy and lobbying around policy. So one of their major offices has always been in Cape Town, what they call the Parliamentary Office, and there was a staff of 2 or 3 people that worked in that office, and they spent a lot of their time looking at legislation, draft legislation, amendments to legislation, and developing COSATU positions on that legislation. There was some criticism of them within COSATU because they weren't always able to canvass what they were doing widely enough through the Federation. But if I recall correctly, drafts of submissions were often circulated. They certainly did a number of submissions in relation to telecommunications legislation. A lot of that was driven by the affiliate of COSATU that was involved in that particular arena, which was initially the Post Office and Telecommunication Workers Association, which was the COSATU affiliate. They merged, I think, in the mid to late 1990s. They were largely a black membership union, although COSATU has always been a non-racial federation. So even though the bulk of the members of a union like Porto would have been black, they would certainly have had white, coloured, etc. members, and they always, and that's a position they've never moved from, seen themselves as a non-racial union body. There were 2 other unions in the sector organising workers, and of course at that time it was Telkom. There was a predominantly coloured union, and there was a predominantly Indian union, and those 3 unions came together to form the Communication Workers Union, I think in about 96 or 97. And the Communication Workers Union was then involved quite extensively in formulating responses to legislation. So they had very strong positions on the 96 telecommunications green paper, white paper, and the resulting piece of legislation that involved. I came in too late to be part of the National Telecommunications Forum, and hence part of the process that led to the 1996 Act. But I was involved in a thing called the NITF, National IT Forum, which is really more of a kind of information society structure. People like Lucy Abrams was involved. We had Steve Mube, who's the outgoing chair of ICASA, was quite heavily involved. People like Etienne Tiart, who's a person I remember from ESCOM, and it was again one of those kind of stakeholder bodies, a group of labor representatives, and I at COSATU took on the role of kind of mobilizing and organizing those people, a group of business people, a group of academics, a group of civil society. So it was one of those kind of typical sort of multi-stakeholder forums. And that was really my kind of involvement in policy set of issues. And it was that involvement in policy set of issues which eventually led me out of COSATU and into the academic arena. And I think looking back, when possibly the thing that we missed was mobile, like so many other people missed. We spent a lot of our time trying to get people connected through desktop computers, modems, etc. And more trade union organizers, trade union officials had cell phones. And yes, they were not smartphones, so they were very basic cell phones. But the use of SMSs and bulk SMSs, for example, I think we were too slow on that. And we were too slow on exploiting the existing platforms. I think we came very much, most of us working in that area came from a computing background, use of desktop type of technologies, and to an extent try to foist those on the movement because we could see the possibilities, rather than actually looking very carefully at what was the situation on the ground, what were people using, what were they adopting, because they weren't adopting computers, they were adopting mobile phones. And they were phoning each other and they were sending SMSs, which was the application at the time. This is long before things like WhatsApp, it's long before even the text-based one, that Mixit, that's just gone under. And I think had we been aware, or had we seen where things were going, we would have exploited those kind of technologies a lot more than we did, because those were the technologies that people had. They had them in their pockets. They were using them for other purposes anyway. If you're going to maximize and make use of the technologies, you've got to follow where the landscape is going. I think we did produce stuff of value. I think if you look now, you'll see the labour movement is actually making much more effective use of the technologies. I'd like to go back into COSATU and see what's happening. What are people actually doing in terms of email, the internet, and obviously now there would be a lot of use of things like social media. I've actually checked whether COSATU has a Facebook page. Might be worthwhile looking at to see whether affiliates have Facebook pages. I certainly know that they tweet quite extensively. I know most of them have websites. Almost all of them use email to disseminate press statements and to communicate with their structures. So it's now, almost 20 years on, it's now very much more mainstream within the labour movement.